Well, hey everybody. So I wanted to start a little video series on overarching themes in history. Themes that are human behavior and how human behavior has an impact and influence on motivating and creating events in history. So the first three I want to look at, and there will be three different videos that go along with this. And the first one is power. Power, a really big motivating force that drives human beings to behave in ways that allows somebody to feel larger than life. They're above everyone else, and power is something that I think most of us crave. Now, when I say power, I don't mean all of us want to be in charge of everything in the world all of the time. But we certainly want to have power within our own lives. We want to be able to make decisions about our own lives. We want to be able to have the freedom to say yes or to say no or maybe. That's what we all want within our own sphere, in our own bubble of our world. But when we're looking at it in the eyes of history and an overarching theme in history, we have to take our desire for power over our own lives and the ability to make the decisions and choices and make options, take options and make choices out of the options that we have in front of us. We take that and we're gonna springboard that onto a larger stage. But always remember that if you don't kind of understand the power we're going to be talking about in that larger than life scale, go back to yourself. And always, with all these things, these concepts, go back into yourself and think about it. What do you want? That's a question that we rarely ask ourselves. And we don't assume always that, or equate, actually that's a better word, we don't always equate what we feel we deserve with power or the expectations that we have to be able to make choices we want with power. But power is definitely very important. There are power differentials between genders, there's power differentials between race, and that is really a modern construct. Back in the ancient world, there is no concept of race. So power differentials are not based off the color of someone's skin, but rather where they're from. Are they an outsider or are they one of us? So those power differentials existed. There were also, when we look at Confucianism, we're looking at power differentials between socioeconomic or social constructs, sometimes socioeconomic, but social constructs within Confucius, relationships, the king, the leader to the subjects, the husband to the wife, the older brother to the youngers. There are different power differentials and expectations from each group. And so in some ways, some power dynamics are set up to where while the man has the power, with Confucius, the leader has the power and over everybody, the leader, along with that power comes great responsibility to look over the people that he leads. And so the people who defer to the leader are deferring to the leader because they believe that that leader is going to protect them and take care of them because that power is an awesome power. That power holds gravity, it holds weight, and very, very importantly, responsibility. And many of the power differentials, when we look at feudalism, that power differential is expectations of behavior are very much a part of that power dynamic. There's also how do people gain power, and one of the things that you're going to be looking at in world civilizations is a cycle of power, a cycle of conquering, and empires being gained and empires being lost, gained and lost, gained and lost. We look at ancient Sumer, the earliest of the Mesopotamian civilizations. And when we see that, we see the Assyrians coming in and taking them over, and then later, eventually the Persians come in and take over, and then the Muslim population, the Safavids, come in and take over. There's a large cycle of gaining land and gaining power, creating an empire, and then losing it, the decline. In China, we see the beginnings of dynastic cycles. The emperor now has the power over the region, but that dynastic cycle loses something called the mandate of heaven because of bad behavior, and then it goes in decline. We see the rise of Greece and the fall of Greece. We see the rise of Alexander the Great's empire, really, of land ownership, and then the fall of it. Romans rise to power. The Roman world, the Roman Empire, lasts approximately 1,000 years, depending on who you're talking to, what their field is, how you define the late empire, which would be the Byzantine Empire. Is that part of the medieval world or not? Historians go back and forth on some of this, but still, the influences of the Roman Empire, they grow over time and then they decline. So this cycle of who has power and how power is lost is a very important thing. I want you guys to kind of perk up your antenna and think about this, because though we live in a time period where we have the internet and we have contact with people all over the globe, we make kind of assumptions that the way things are, the way they're always going to stay, and that might not be the case. So power, how do we get power? How do we keep power? How do we lose power? And it is a very important concept. Who has the power? How do they get the power? So how do people gain power? What is the process by which a person comes on the scene and is able to gather an army together, is able to, do they need an army for power? Is wealth a part of this dynamic, which we'll get into in the next video? And how do you keep it? How do you keep it? There was a man named Niccolo Machiavelli, and he wrote during the princes to the Medici family in Florence a little book titled The Prince. And in that book, he goes over power, but this is not just something new under the sun in his head. He is obviously a studier of history. But a lot of people attribute some of what he says to a more modern way of looking at the world and power in general, which is, do you rule by fear or do you rule by love? Is it better to be feared than loved, is what he says. So it's a real interesting concept, because so much of the time people are ruled by fear. So the leader puts the fear in us. We are afraid, we are stifled, we don't want to move anywhere, do anything. We're almost stuck in place out of fear. And while that is a way to power, without a doubt, it's actually a very fragile way to hold power. It's very, very fragile. So fear is a feeling, that's that emotional intelligence that I was talking about in an earlier video on history. Fear is this emotional intelligence, and they're the two first, I think, and I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist. I'm not a, I would reach out to your psychology professor for real information about this. But from what I have gathered in my life, fear and anger are the emotions we go to first. When something is new to us, when something seems off to us, fear and anger are those emotions that are very easily linked to the unknown or to change. And we human beings, we don't really like change. Sometimes there are some folks who say, yeah, let's go do such and such. But people who do that usually have a real good sense of safety. And so they're coming from a place of feeling safe and secure, and so they feel comfortable doing something that they've never done before. But that's not the case for everybody. And there are a lot of people, and I would even venture to say the vast majority of people in our modern age for sure, and in the past, I guess, but that don't have that very strong foundation in safety and security. We right now live in a time where before the pandemic, people are under a great deal of stress. Life is very, very different than it was even 30 years ago, even when I was a college student in the late 70s and early 80s. I mean, what a difference the world is. So the stresses that I had are nothing at all compared to the stresses of today. Now you add to those bits of stress, those things that have really unnerved us, and we add the pandemic to it. And so we're even in a more fragile state. And so how easy is it? I mean, really, how easy is it for us to attach fear and anger to the situation that we're in right now? So ruling somebody through fear, they're afraid of you, is fragile. And eventually, that type of power is easily crumbled. Even though people aren't saying anything to you because they're afraid of you, if someone comes along that seems to have a better deal or might be easier or just even appears better, they're going to attach themselves to them. And the example in history is the Aztec civilization. In the Aztec civilization, Montezuma and the Aztecs ruled through fear and iron fist. And all the subordinate tribal people that were around the Aztec civilization, they had to kowtow to Montezuma and the Aztecs, and they were so afraid of him. Then when the Spaniards came, there weren't very many Spaniards, but by the looks of them, they looked like they had, well, they did. They had better weapons, and they had armor, and they had all these things. By all appearances, they looked like good guys. And so the outlying communities attached themselves to the Spaniards. And the Spaniards played on that fear And then they were able to overthrow Montezuma very, very quickly. And it wasn't through use of firearms and warring techniques. It was because the tribal people around Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City, but the area that and the tribal people that surrounded the Aztec civilization, they so hated and they were so angry with Montezuma because they were so afraid of him, and they were angry with that fear that the first group of people they saw who they thought could overthrow him, they attached themselves to, not realizing that it was better to know your leader, as bad as he was, than to bring on somebody you didn't. So be careful what you wish for there. So power, when you rule through fear, it is very, very fragile. And history tells us this. And as you go through your reading, I want you to perk your antenna up to evaluate. How long did this civilization last? What made it decline? How did they lose their power, and how did they keep their power? Now, many people kept their power through divine intervention, divinity. China, you have the mandate from heaven. Now, there's no real one God in China because they have ancestral veneration. You see that Mulan does not, ding, 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 call the ancestors, it's not a god, it's the ancestors who are going to look after Mulan. So they have ancestor veneration, but the heavens are what gives the person the ability to rule. They have the mandate of heaven. How do they lose the mandate of heaven? When they become bad and corrupt, that's how they say they lose the mandate of heaven, when they lose that responsibility, that understanding that with power comes great responsibility. Then you have kings who believe they have absolute power and that they are the God on earth. And that we get into Europe with the papal states. This is God is who gives me my power. Now, who's going to say otherwise? Especially if you rule over a populace of subjects who believe in the same God and they acknowledge that God gave you these powers over them, and therefore what you say must go. Now, theoretically, once again, with power comes great responsibility. And as we go through looking at the early medieval Europe and the feudal system, you're going to see those different power differentials where the people begin to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like with the Magna Carta. Look, you might be king, but are you really above the law? So, that power differential begins to shift over time. Power, so you can get power from divinity, divine intervention, either through the mandate of heaven or through God. But there's another way you can get power, and that is through the people. The people can give you power. The people you look after, the people who you are a chief over, they can give you power. In the early Indus Valley region, for instance, that we study in history, the very earliest people who come down through the Indus Valley who are not original to the Indus Valley are called Aryans. Now these guys, Ayrans, these guys that come down into the Indus Valley about the time that the Indus Valley civilization that we have looked at in our books from the Four River civilizations begins to move out. Now, moving out and migration is happening because something is happening. Maybe there's a pandemic. Maybe they're running out of fuel. Maybe they've overforested. Maybe they are running out of food sources. Maybe it's an environmental issue. It's a drought. Who knows? We don't actually know yet. But as the original Indus Valley people were moving out, in come a group of people called Aryans, and they're warrior tribal people, nomads, and they are led by a chief. And that chief is put into power by the votes of the warriors, by the votes of the warriors. So it goes, the warriors are the highest member of that social structure. And that social structure eventually becomes the caste system in India. So those Aryans are the ancestors to modern day Indians in India. Now, the priests, the Brahmin class, is second in order in the very, very earliest group. Now that's around 1500 BC, okay? About 1,000 years later, come over here, and right before the Persians come in, the Aryans are not warrior people, nomadic people anymore. When they come down into the Indus Valley, they go, wow, man, this looks like really, really cool place to live. And they settle down. And as they settle down, they become more safe and they become more secure. And then what happens? They have more people. They have a population explosion. Well, one area can only hold so many people. And so they begin to move and create a new region and a new community in another region. And 1,000 years after, from 1500 to about 500 AD, what we see are 16 principalities, little minor kingdoms that are ruled by princes, not chiefs. And how do those princes get to be the princes? Well, during that 1,000 years, what changed is that instead of the people, the warriors, choosing who the leader was, it has changed to where the priests are investing. So they're giving that prince, they endow them, they imbue them with the rights from the gods. The rights from the gods, because the priests, the Brahmins, are the interpreters of the Vedas, the holy books of Hinduism. And Hinduism is a polytheistic, they have multiple gods, a polytheistic religion. And so they go from the people giving power to the warriors to the priests investing, giving the power to the priests, the powers that come to them divinely. Which then ends up, that's the same kind of thing that happens even in England and Great Britain. When Queen Elizabeth took the throne, she was queen right away after her father passed away. But until the coronation, where was that? In a church. And who invested? There was an investiture process. Who did that? Well, the Bishop of Canterbury. So it's the same kind of thing that now the Brahmins, the priests, are investing the princes with power. So now what has happened with the social construct? Well, instead of the warriors being on the top of the social strata, over by 1,000 years later, you have the Brahmins as the top social class in that social strata, with the warriors right beneath them. Okay? So you could get power from the people. And that was really, really a huge deal of why Alexander the Great was amazing. And before him, why the Persian Empire, which was the largest empire on the planet at the time. And really, since they had such a huge empire. And how did they do it? They didn't micromanage the people. They gave the local people the ability to maintain their local social structure. What did they want? They just wanted money. We'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about the Persians and the Romans and Alexander the Great. But Alexander the Great really brings forward a Greek idea to the areas that he conquers, and this idea of citizenship. Citizenship. So you're not a subject having to do what other people tell you. You now are a citizen, which is a verb. It's an action word. It means that you have the ability to make choices about your own governance, about your own life. And that brings us to a lot more crazy questions about, can we do that for ourselves? Are we really capable of governing ourselves as crazy, flawed, feeling human beings? But that's a really great concept that has stuck with us and is with us right now in our modern world, and certainly in this country, and really in every other country on the planet. Idea of citizenship. So, and then how do you lose power? Power is lost in lots of ways. And you will see over time, power is lost. You might have a leader like Charlemagne, who's an amazing leader, almost larger than life. And he dies. And he has 3 sons, and the kingdom is broken up into 3 pieces, and none of them have the charisma that their father had. And so slowly, Charlemagne's empire breaks down. That happens with Genghis Khan and various leaders throughout history. They are unbelievable leaders. They're so unique in their charisma. And when they die, no one can fill their shoes. And in that void, chaos ensues. And so the empire is lost. And the power, it's like a power vacuum. And up out of that power vacuum rises a group of people, maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe a group that will feed the fear of the people, try and make sense of what's happened so that they can find a new normal. Sometimes you lose power in the mandate of heaven. You lose power because you have not fulfilled your responsibilities to your people. You are corrupt. You're not paying attention to the people. And so when you're corrupt, when you're not paying attention to people, when you're all about you and your concubines or your world or whatever, then once again, there's really a power vacuum. Who's running the show? Well, turns out the people who are running the show, they want that. They're the ones who are really the power behind the scenes. They might keep you there just because it takes the onus. Nobody sees them pulling the puppet strings from behind the screen, or they get rid of you. Other people come in and they will conquer you because there's a power deficit. So there are many ways that you can lose power. So think about this. Think about power within relationships, power between males and females, personal relationships, larger relationships. So your parents have power over you. Why? What's their job? Their job is to protect you. So keep that in mind as you look through all of this, and always remember, if you need me, just email me, and there will be another video here soon on wealth. Then we're going to talk about religion, and eventually we're going to talk about laws. Okie dokie, artichoke. I'll see you guys later. Bye.